I remember the exact moment everything changed. I was sitting in my living room, a cup of cold coffee on the side table, scrolling through my phone when I saw it. A family group chat message from my daughter Sandra, with a photo attached. I clicked on it with trembling fingers and there it was. A screenshot of a booking confirmation for a Caribbean cruise. Premium cabin. All-inclusive luxury package. Departure date. 3 weeks away. Look everyone. Sandra had written. Finally saved up enough for us all. Mom and Dad, you two can stay home and hold down the fort, right? Can't afford cabins for everyone anyway. Sorry. We'll bring you back something nice. My heart literally stopped. I wasn't even angry at first, I was confused. Hurt, yes, but confused. This wasn't new, not really. For years, decades even, I had been the support system, the safety net, the person everyone called when things got tough. And I had always been there. Always. But I wasn't included in the things that mattered. I wasn't part of the celebrations, the adventures, the vacations. I was the logistics, the backup plan, the one left behind. That message arrived at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. By 3:15 p.m., I had something else open on my screen. Luxury cruises. Real ones. The kind I had always put aside money for but never actually booked because something else always came up. Someone always needed something more urgent than my happiness. I kept clicking, looking at cabin photos, reading reviews, researching different cruise lines. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness anymore. This time it was something different. This time it was clarity. I'm Eleanor, and for 63 years, I have been the invisible woman in my own family's story. I've watched my children grow, supported them through marriages and divorces, loaned them money I didn't have, babysat grandchildren on weekends when I was exhausted from my own job, and accepted it all with grace because that's what mothers do. That's what good mothers do. But somewhere along the way, my family had decided that my needs, my desires, my happiness, these things were negotiable. These were things that could be postponed indefinitely in favor of their comfort. And that Tuesday afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. To understand what happened next, you need to understand where I started. I wasn't always the overlooked woman. I was once someone people noticed. I was once someone people valued. I remember being younger, being Eleanor who made people feel safe, Eleanor who had answers, Eleanor who could fix things. I was a nurse for 40 years. 40 years of night shifts and 12-hour rotations and people depending on me for their literal survival. When I came home I had nothing left, but I gave anyway because that's what I did. My husband Michael passed away 17 years ago. Cancer. Watching the strongest person you know become fragile is something that changes your entire life. After he died, I thought my children would draw closer. I thought we would become an even tighter unit, that his absence would somehow make us more precious to each other. Instead, his death marked the beginning of my invisibility. Sandra, my oldest, was the first to start treating me differently. After the funeral, the visits became less frequent. The phone calls dwindled. When Michael died, I needed help, practical emotional help. But everyone was dealing with their own grief, which I understood. So I didn't ask for much. I just quietly moved through my sadness and was available when they needed me. Always available. That became my role and I accepted it because I loved them. My second daughter, Jennifer, followed Sandra's lead. She was dealing with a difficult marriage back then, and I became her safe harbor. She would call me crying at midnight, and I would listen for hours. I offered advice. I provided support. When her marriage finally fell apart 3 years ago, I let her move in with me while she got back on her feet. She lived in my house for 18 months. She paid no rent. I fed her, clothed her, listened to her pain. And when she finally got her own apartment and found stability, she saw me less and less. The gratitude was there, but it was distant. It was brief. It was obligatory. My son Marcus was different, or so I thought. Marcus was the one who would call me to check in, who would bring his kids over for Sunday dinners, who would ask how I was doing. Or at least he did for a while. That changed about 5 years ago when he got married for the second time. His new wife, Rebecca, seemed to have a way of filtering my access to him. Invitations would come through her, with apologetic messages about how busy they were. Eventually, the invitations slowed down and then stopped. I didn't blame them. Not really. Life is complicated. Everyone is busy. Everyone is dealing with their own problems. That's what I told myself every time I set the table for Sunday dinner and nobody came. Every time I bought plane tickets to visit and got a last-minute cancellation. Every time I texted photos to the family group chat that went unanswered for days. I normalized their absence because the alternative was to acknowledge that I had raised 3 children who didn't particularly want to spend time with their mother. But I kept showing up anyway. When Sandra's son got in trouble at school, I drove 3 hours to be there. When Jennifer had a health scare, I was at the hospital before everyone else. When Marcus's first business venture failed and he was falling into depression, I spent every Friday at his house, listening, encouraging, reminding him of his strength. I was the constant. I was the reliable one. I was the person you could count on. What I didn't realize was that being reliable doesn't make you valuable in a family system where your value is only measured by what you provide. The vacation situation had been brewing for years, though I didn't see it that way initially. It started with small exclusions. A weekend trip to the beach that was planned last minute was so sorry, Mom. We only booked 3 cabins and the kids needed their own rooms. A ski trip that I wasn't told about until after everyone returned. A girls' weekend to Las Vegas that Jennifer organized with cousins and friends, and somehow it never occurred to her to include her own mother. I watched all these vacations happen on social media. Photos of everyone laughing together, enjoying activities, making memories. And I was at home, scrolling through these images of my own family having adventures without me. Each time I convinced myself it was practical. It was logistical. It wasn't personal. It wasn't that they didn't want me there, it was just timing and circumstances. But somewhere deep inside, in a place I didn't want to examine too closely, I knew better. I knew that if they had truly wanted me there, they would have found a way. Then came the conversations. Well, they weren't really conversations. Conversations imply dialogue, back and forth, listening to both sides. These were lectures. These were declarations. The first one was with Sandra about 3 years ago. We were at her house, having tea in her perfectly decorated kitchen. A kitchen I had helped her renovate, by the way, by lending her $3,000 from my retirement savings because she asked and I couldn't say no. We were talking about a birthday trip she was planning to Spain for her 40th, and I mentioned that it sounded wonderful, and that if she needed any help with planning or wanted advice on where to stay, I would be happy to help. That's when she said it. Mom, not everything is about you, okay? Not every celebration has to include you. You've had your life. You've done your thing. It's time for us to have our own experiences without feeling like you have to be there tagging along. I remember feeling like I had been slapped. I wasn't asking to go. I was offering to help. But the way she said it, the implication was clear. My presence was burdensome. My interest was intrusive. My existence in these moments was somehow presumptuous. When I tried to explain that I had just been offering to help, not asking to be invited, Sandra rolled her eyes. That's exactly what I mean, Mom. You're always offering to help, always involved, always making it about you. Some of us need space. Some of us need to build lives that aren't about our mother. I apologized. I actually apologized for offering to help my daughter with her birthday plans. That's what I had become. That's what they had made me become. But the real turning point came during what we now call the summer of exclusions. This was 2 years ago. I had actually inherited a small amount of money from my sister. Not much, maybe $30,000. It wasn't life-changing, but it was something I hadn't expected. For the first time in my life, I had a little money that was actually mine, that wasn't allocated to someone else's problem or someone else's need. I thought about that money a lot. I could get my kitchen updated. I could finally take that trip to Italy I had always dreamed about. I could do something just for me by me for my own happiness. But I was tentative about it. I didn't want to seem frivolous. I didn't want my children to think I was being selfish with this unexpected windfall. So I did what I always do. I talked to my family about it first. That's when everything came out. All of it. It was like opening a floodgate of resentment that had been building for years. Jennifer said, "Mom, honestly, you're retired. You have time to travel whenever you want. Why do you need to go to Italy? You don't even speak Italian. It seems like a waste of money when you could be helping with our kids' college funds." Sandra said, "This is the thing I'm talking about, Mom. You finally have money and the first thing you think about is something for yourself? We're your family. Don't we matter?" Marcus said, Look, I get it, you want to do something nice. But realistically, you're at an age where you should be thinking about your healthcare costs and maybe helping us out while you're still in a position to. You have the money now. Why not invest in our future instead of your own? And that was the moment. That was when I finally understood what my value was in their eyes. My money, my labor, my availability, my sacrifice, my happiness, that was never part of the equation. I didn't get Italy. I didn't get the kitchen renovation. Most of that inheritance went to help pay for Sandra's daughter's orthodontics, to cover Jennifer's car insurance for a year when her company downsized her hours, and to help Marcus's business purchase inventory for a new product line. I told myself it was good. I told myself that this is what love means. This is what family means. But something had shifted inside me. Something fundamental had changed. Then came last year when the pattern accelerated. Now, I want you to understand something before I go further. I never gave them this money expecting anything in return. I didn't give it with the expectation of vacations or gratitude or even particularly good treatment. I gave it because in my mind that's what family does. But what I started to realize is that my family had developed a very one-directional view of what family should do. That's something I want to be clear about. If you're watching this and you have family members who take from you constantly, if you feel like you're always giving and never receiving, I want you to know that you don't have to keep doing it. There's a way to reclaim your life, to set boundaries, to decide that your happiness matters too. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you can see how other people have navigated these situations. It helps to know you're not alone. Throughout this entire period, the vacation thing continued. Every year there was a family trip. Sometimes multiple trips. They would all go and come back with stories and photos, and I would hear about it secondhand if at all. I was working at a part-time job through my 60s just to stay active, and they would plan trips during my work schedule, though I don't think the schedule was ever really the point. The point was that I wasn't invited. I started keeping a list. Not consciously at first, but I did. A mental list of all the vacations I wasn't included in. I'm not proud of that. Keeping score of family slights isn't dignified. But I did it anyway. There was the New York trip when Marcus's business hit a milestone. There was the Cancun vacation when Sandra and her husband celebrated their anniversary. There was the cruise to Alaska that Jennifer took with her boyfriend and her friends. Every single one of these trips I wasn't asked. Every single one I found out about through photos on social media. I would mention it sometimes very carefully. I would say something like, "Oh, that looks like such a fun trip. I've always wanted to see Alaska." And the response was always the same. Either they would get defensive and say something about how not everything has to include me, or they would offer a superficial apology and explain why logistically it hadn't worked out. They never once said, "You know what, Mom? Let's reschedule and include you." They never once said, "We want you there, let's figure it out." So I stopped mentioning it. I stopped hoping. I just accepted it as my life. The life where I was there to support everyone else's happiness, but not invited to be part of my own family's joy. This went on for years. Literal years. And I told myself I was fine. I told myself I was above it. I told myself that I had my own life and my own interests and their vacations didn't matter to me. But that was a lie I was telling myself. The truth is, it mattered very much. The truth is, every time I saw those photos of my children having fun without me, it reinforced the same message. You don't deserve this. You don't deserve happiness. You don't deserve to be included. You deserve to stay home and be available in case someone needs you. Then came that Tuesday with the group chat message. The Caribbean cruise. Premium cabins. "Sorry, Mom, can't afford it, you'll have to stay home." And that was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I don't mean snapped in an angry, destructive way. I mean snapped in a clear, crystalline way. I mean snapped in a way where everything suddenly made sense, and I understood what had been happening to me for all these years. I had been invisible in my own life because I had allowed myself to be. I had accepted a role that made me the helper, the supporter, the one who was always available but never invited. I had made myself small so that my family could be big. I had shrunk so that they could expand. And sitting in that living room with a cold cup of coffee next to me and a phone displaying a family vacation I wasn't invited to, I made a decision. I decided that it was time to reclaim my life. The funny thing about making a big decision is that it feels huge in the moment, but then you have to actually follow through with it. And that's the part that scared me. Not the decision itself, that part felt right. What scared me was what came after. I was 63 years old. I had never in my adult life done something this selfish. I had never in my adult life put my own happiness so directly in front of my family's expectations. I spent that whole Tuesday evening researching cruise lines. I had some money left over, not much but enough. I had been stashing away a little bit of money for the past few years, $20 here, $50 there. Money that I wasn't telling anyone about because it felt almost rebellious to have something just for me. Over time it had added up to about $8,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for what I was thinking. I looked at different cruise lines, Royal Caribbean, Carnival, Princess Cruises. I read reviews and compared itineraries. The Caribbean seemed to call to me. Not because it was where my family was going, but because it was somewhere I had always wanted to go. I had seen friends' photos of the Caribbean, and there was something about the water, the islands, the sense of adventure that appealed to me. I narrowed down my options. There was a Carnival cruise leaving from Miami in 4 weeks, heading to the Eastern Caribbean. It was a 7-day voyage. It wasn't the luxury of the bigger lines, but it was still luxury compared to how I lived. The cabin was a balcony room on a midship deck. It wasn't the biggest or the best, but it was mine. The itinerary included ports in St. Martin, St. Lucia, and Barbados. The cost was $5,200 for the cabin and fees. It left me with enough money for onboard spending, food, drinks, and activities. I sat there at my computer for hours just looking at it. My finger hovered over the Book Now button repeatedly. Each time I would feel a surge of anxiety. What if I was making a mistake? What if I wasted the money? What if my family found out and got angry? What if they said I was being irresponsible? What if? But then I would look back at that group chat message. Sorry, Mom, you'll have to stay home. And that feeling would return. That clarity. That rightness of this decision. At 11:47 p.m. on that Tuesday night, I booked the cruise. I clicked the button, filled in my payment information with my credit card, and confirmed the reservation. Within seconds, my email chimed with a confirmation number. The cruise was booked. 7 days, all mine, leaving in 4 weeks. I didn't tell anyone immediately. That was intentional. I wanted to sit with this decision for a while. I wanted to feel what it felt like to have something just for me. Something that was mine to keep or change or cancel if I wanted to. For the first time in decades, I had a secret that was just mine. Of course, I couldn't keep it secret forever. About 2 weeks later, I mentioned it casually to Jennifer during a phone call. We were talking about something mundane. She was complaining about her work situation, and there was a lull in the conversation. I said, "Well, I'm looking forward to a little break from everything. I booked myself a cruise. It leaves in 2 weeks. The response was silence. "Mom," Jennifer finally said. "You booked a cruise? Like by yourself?" "Yes," I said. "The Eastern Caribbean, 7 days, leaves from Miami. When were you going to tell us?" There was something in her tone that I had never quite heard before. It sounded like hurt almost, or maybe surprise. "I'm telling you now," I said. "It's not like a family trip. It's just for me. Something I wanted to do. That's a lot of money to spend on yourself, don't you think?" Now the tone had shifted to judgment. "Mom, you're retired. That's not really responsible. What if you need that money for something important?" "I've had money set aside for this," I said, and I was proud of how calm I sounded. "It's my money, and I'm using it for something I want to do." "Well, what if there's an emergency and you're on a cruise?" Jennifer was really going now, her voice escalating slightly. "What if one of us needs you? You're not going to be available." I took a deep breath. "Jennifer, you managed without me for 7 days before. I'm sure you can manage again." "This is not like you, Mom," she said. "You're being selfish." There it was. The word I knew would come eventually. Selfish. That word that had been used against me my entire life, that had kept me small and compliant and available. That word that meant, your needs don't matter. Your happiness is secondary. Your desires are less important than everyone else's comfort. "I know it's not like me," I said, and I meant it. And I'm okay with that. After I hung up with Jennifer, I sat in my living room for a long time. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel the triumph I had expected to feel. Instead, I felt guilty. I felt like I had done something wrong by wanting something for myself. That was when I realized just how deep this had gone. This wasn't just about vacations. This was about my fundamental belief about my own worth and my right to happiness. Within hours, Sandra called. Jennifer had clearly gotten the information out quickly and shared it with the family group chat. Sandra was more measured than Jennifer, but the message was similar. "Mom, I'm concerned," Sandra said. "This doesn't seem like you. Are you okay? Are you going through something? Do you need to talk?" This was Sandra's technique, concern disguised as control. She did this all the time. Instead of saying, "I don't want you to do this," she would say, "I'm worried about you," which made it harder to argue against because who wants to worry their daughter? "I'm fine," I said. "I just wanted to do something for myself. That's all." "But a cruise? Alone? That seems risky. And it's expensive. What if you get sick? What if something happens and you're out in the middle of the ocean?" I had heard some version of these arguments before. They were reasons why I couldn't do things, why I should put my life on hold, why my safety was better served by staying home and being available for everyone else. "I'm going to be fine," I said firmly. "I just think you're making an impulsive decision," Sandra continued. "And I think it might be worth thinking about whether you're being responsible. You're not a young woman anymore, Mom. You need to think about the future." But I was thinking about the future. And I realized that my future, stretched out ahead of me if I didn't change something, looked like this. I would be 70, then 80, then 90, and I would still be waiting for an invitation to a family vacation that would never come. I would still be the person they called when they needed something but never the person they thought of when they were planning something fun. I would reach the end of my life and have taken exactly 0 vacations that brought me joy. And I would have done it in service of a family that didn't particularly value me. That's when I understood. This cruise wasn't really about a cruise. It was about taking back my life. Marcus called next. He was angry in a way the women weren't. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" he said. "Your kids are struggling. And you're spending thousands of dollars on a luxury cruise?" "I'm not spending money on your problems anymore," I said quietly. "This is my money, and I'm using it for myself." "Mom, that's not fair. We've always been able to count on you. What if we need help and you're not available?" "Then you'll figure something out," I said. "You always do." It was remarkable how quickly the guilt started to work on me. Within 24 hours of telling my family about the cruise, I was second-guessing myself. I was thinking about canceling. I was thinking about refunding the money and using it to help Marcus with his business again, or Jennifer with her car, or Sandra with whatever was going on in her life that week. But then I did something different. Instead of calling them back and apologizing and canceling the cruise, I called one of my oldest friends, Dorothy. Dorothy had been my friend since nursing school, 43 years ago. I hadn't talked to Dorothy in months because I was always too busy helping my family to maintain my own friendships. When she answered the phone, she actually said, "Eleanor, where have you been? I've missed you." I told her everything. About the years of exclusion, about the family trips I wasn't invited to, about the group chat message, about booking the cruise, about my family's reaction. And do you know what Dorothy said? "It's about damn time." She wasn't being flip. She was serious. Dorothy told me that she had watched this happen to me for years, that it had broken her heart to see how I made myself smaller and smaller for people who didn't appreciate me. She told me that booking this cruise was one of the best decisions I could make, not because it was about the cruise itself, but because it was about me finally saying that I mattered too. "Eleanor," she said, "you are so focused on being useful that you've forgotten how to be happy. And your family has gotten so used to you being available that they don't even see you as a person anymore. They see you as a resource. But you're not a resource. You're a person, and you deserve to have a beautiful life." I cried when she said that. I actually cried because someone outside of my family was seeing me, really seeing me as a person who deserved things. Dorothy didn't just support me verbally. She took action. She told me that she was going to make sure I was ready for this cruise. She said she would pick me out outfits, help me think about what to pack, and give me advice about activities. She told me she wanted to live vicariously through me because she was so tired of watching me live such a small life. That conversation with Dorothy changed something in me. It made the cruise real in a different way. It wasn't just a rebellion against my family anymore. It was a gift I was giving to myself, and someone who loved me was honoring that and celebrating it. Over the next 2 weeks I prepared. I bought 2 new sundresses, something I hadn't done in years because I always thought my money was better spent on other things. I got a pedicure, something I'd never done before. I had my hair done differently, shorter and more styled than I'd kept it in decades. I bought sunscreen and a new swimsuit. I made a list of activities I wanted to do on the cruise. Spa treatments, shows, beach time at the ports, trying new foods, dancing if there was dancing. My family, in the meantime, continued to express their concerns and disappointment. They didn't understand why I was being this way, and they made sure I knew it. But something in me had fundamentally shifted. Their disapproval no longer had the same power over me that it once did. I had felt their disapproval for so long that I had become invisible. But the moment I refused to remain invisible, the moment I did something just for me, I realized that I had actually been visible all along. I just had to believe that I was worth seeing. The final week before the cruise, I had dinner with my entire family. Sandra and her husband, their 2 children, Jennifer and her boyfriend, Marcus, Rebecca, and his kids. Everyone gathered at Sandra's house. I knew they had organized it to talk to me about the cruise, to try to convince me one more time that I was making a mistake. When I arrived, there was an uncomfortable tension in the room. The kids didn't quite know what was happening, but they could feel that something was different. During dinner, after we had eaten, Sandra brought it up directly. "Mom, we've all been talking," she said, "and we're really concerned about this cruise. We think you should cancel it." "Why?" I asked simply. "Because it's unsafe," Sandra said. "Because it's wasteful. Because you should be thinking about your future, not spending money on indulgences. Because you need to be a grandmother and help us," Jennifer added. "We've always been able to count on you, and this feels like you're abandoning us." "Because it's irresponsible," Marcus said. "You're at an age where you should be saving money for healthcare costs, not spending it on a week of partying on a cruise ship." I looked at all 3 of my children, and I realized that they all genuinely believed what they were saying. They genuinely believed that my life should exist primarily as a support system for their lives. They genuinely believed that my happiness was less important than their comfort. And I realized that this belief hadn't come from nowhere. It had come from me. I had taught them this by accepting this role without question. I had taught them that my needs were negotiable. "I'm not canceling the cruise," I said calmly. "I'm going. And you're going to have to figure out how to feel about that." There was silence around the table. One of Sandra's children, my granddaughter Emma, who was 12, looked at me with something like admiration in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. I could see that she was watching this moment, watching her mother try to control her grandmother and watching her grandmother refuse. "Mom," Sandra's voice was tight, "this is really hurtful. After everything we've done for you, what have you done for me?" I asked, and the words were out before I could stop them. "Tell me specifically what you've done for me in the last 5 years." Sandra opened her mouth and closed it. Jennifer and Marcus were staring at the table. Because the truth was, while I had done countless things for them, loans, support, childcare, emotional labor, they had not reciprocated. Their version of family love was receiving my support, not giving back. "That's not fair," Sandra said finally. "We've always been there for you." "When?" I asked. "When were you there for me? When was the last time one of you asked me how I was doing? When was the last time you included me in something you were doing because you wanted me there?" No one answered. "I'm going on this cruise," I said, standing up from the table. "And I'm going to have the time of my life. And I hope you all can be happy for me. But if you can't, then I've realized that that's your problem, not mine." I left dinner early. I drove home in the dark, and I cried the entire drive. Not because I was sad, but because I was grieving. I was grieving the relationship I thought I had with my children, the family I thought we were. I was mourning the years I had spent making myself small for people who didn't even notice how small I had become. But underneath that grief, there was something else. There was a kind of excitement. There was the feeling of stepping into my own life finally, after so many years of stepping aside for everyone else. The night before the cruise, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting up and checking my suitcase, making sure I had everything packed. I had to be at the port by 11 a.m. The cruise left at 4 p.m. For the first time in my life, I was about to do something entirely for myself, for my own happiness, with no one depending on me to take care of them while I was gone. My phone buzzed around 6 a.m. with a text from Marcus. "Mom, we're sorry. Safe travels. We love you." It was a small thing, but it was something. Not an apology for how they had treated me over the years, but an acknowledgement that perhaps they had been wrong about the cruise. I didn't respond immediately. I just sat with it. By the time I got to the port, I was nervous and excited and terrified and joyful all at once. The ship was enormous, a massive structure of white and blue. And I stood looking at it for a long moment. This was really happening. I was really doing this. I checked in, got my room key card, and made my way to my cabin. It was small, but it had a balcony, and the balcony overlooked the ocean. I put my suitcase on the bed and stepped out onto the balcony, and I just stood there breathing the salt air. For 40 years I had been a nurse, which meant I had spent 4 decades of my life in service of other people's health and well-being. For 63 years, I had been a mother and daughter and sister and friend, which meant I had spent 6 decades in service of my family. And now, for the first time since I was a very young woman, I was in a place where I had no one to take care of but myself. I cried again, but this time it felt like crying that was healing something. The first day of the cruise, I did absolutely nothing productive. I sat on my balcony for hours with a drink I had ordered from room service. I watched the port get smaller and smaller as the ship pulled away from Miami. I watched other passengers move around the deck, and I realized that most of them were couples or families, but there were also other solo travelers. There was a woman about my age standing at a railing not far from me, and she caught my eye and smiled. We had a whole conversation just from looks, a recognition of being women traveling alone, and that being enough. By the evening, I was ready to explore the ship. I put on one of my new dresses and went to dinner. I sat at a table with a young couple from Canada and an older man traveling solo. We talked about our lives, and I didn't have to perform or take care of anyone emotionally. I just got to be present and interesting and interested. After dinner, I went to one of the ship's lounges and listened to live music. A band was playing and they were good. The lead singer, a man in his 70s with salt and pepper hair, caught my eye from the stage. I'm not being dramatic, he literally made eye contact with me during a song. It was a small moment, nothing more, but I felt seen. I felt like a woman who was worthy of attention, not just the background support character in everyone else's story. I went to bed that night feeling more alive than I had felt in years. I fell asleep to the gentle rocking of the ship, and I dreamed about being young again. The next day, the ship pulled into port at St. Martin. I had scheduled a spa treatment for the afternoon, a hot stone massage, something I had always thought was frivolous and unnecessary. For an hour, I lay on a table while someone who was trained to provide care touched my body with intention and expertise. When it was done, I felt like I had cried and laughed at the same time. My body hadn't been treated that way, with that kind of focused kindness, in longer than I could remember. After the spa, I walked around the port. I bought a sundress from a local vendor. I ate ice cream that was too sweet and rich, and I didn't feel guilty about it. I sat in a beach chair and watched the water and didn't think about anyone who needed me. I just watched the water. That night on the ship, I went to a show, a comedy routine. The comedian was making jokes about aging, and usually those jokes bother me because they imply that getting older makes you less valuable, less attractive, less relevant. But this comedian was different. She was celebrating aging. She was celebrating the freedom of not caring anymore what people thought. And she was 78 years old. I laughed so hard that I cried, and I made a note of that feeling. That's what I wanted to become. A woman who was 78 and still laughing, still celebrating her own existence, still taking up space unapologetically. By the third day, something had shifted in me more deeply. I wasn't just on vacation. I was discovering myself. I realized that I didn't actually know who Eleanor was anymore, separate from being everyone else's support system. I didn't know what I liked to do, what made me happy, what I enjoyed. So I started experimenting. I went to a dance class on the ship and learned to salsa. I was terrible at it, but I danced anyway. I went to a painting class and created an abstract piece that looked like nothing recognizable, but made me happy. I sat and read a book without feeling like I should be doing something more productive. I took a nap in the middle of the day for the first time in years. I talked to other passengers. I heard their stories. There was a woman named Patricia who was traveling because her husband had passed away. And she was taking this trip because she had promised herself she would experience life while she still could. There was a couple celebrating their 10th anniversary. There was a young woman traveling to find herself after a bad breakup. There was a widowed man who took a cruise every year because being on the ocean made him feel close to his wife. I realized that I had been so focused on my role in other people's lives that I had forgotten I was allowed to have my own story. My life wasn't supposed to exist only as a supporting character in my children's narratives. I was allowed to be the main character in my own life. On the 4th day in St. Lucia, I did something that felt incredibly courageous at the time. I went ziplining through the rainforest. At 63, I was one of the oldest people on the tour, but I did it anyway. I strapped myself into a harness and flew through the canopy above the rainforest, and I screamed, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of being alive and doing something that scared me. When I got back to the ship, I video called Dorothy. I told her about the ziplining, and she squealed with such delight that I laughed. She said, "Eleanor, do you hear yourself? You sound alive." That's exactly what I felt. Alive. Like I had been sleepwalking through my life and now I was awake. By the 5th day, I wasn't checking my phone for messages from my family. I wasn't wondering if anyone was missing me, or if there was an emergency I didn't know about. I was just present in my own experience, without that constant underlying anxiety of being needed. That's when I got a text from Sandra. "Mom, I want to apologize for how I reacted to your cruise. I've been thinking about this whole thing, and I realize that I haven't been a very good daughter. I'm sorry for excluding you from family vacations. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't worthy of being included. Will you forgive me?" I read that text 3 times. I showed it to Patricia, the woman I had befriended, and she said, "That's big. She's owning what she did." I texted back, "I appreciate that, Sandra. We can talk about this when I get back." And I meant it. But I also didn't let that text derail what was happening for me on this cruise. This wasn't about repairing relationships with my family. This was about repairing my relationship with myself. On the 6th day, Jennifer called. Not texted, but actually called. When I answered, she was crying. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said. "I've been thinking about how I treated you. And I realized that I was so caught up in my own needs that I didn't even see your needs. I was angry at you for putting yourself first for the first time ever, but that was selfish of me. You put us first for our entire lives. You deserve this. You deserve to be happy." I cried too, but I kept myself from falling back into the old pattern of comforting her, of making her feel better about her guilt. Instead I said, "Thank you for saying that. I'm really happy you understand." When Marcus called later that day, he didn't apologize as directly, but he asked me to do something. He asked me to tell him about my favorite moments so far on the cruise. And so I told him about ziplining through the rainforest and he listened. He actually listened without making it about his concerns or his needs. He just asked questions and listened to my story. On the 7th day, I was back in Miami. The cruise was ending. As I packed my suitcase, I thought about the fact that I was going back to my regular life, but I wasn't the same person who had left Miami 7 days ago. That woman had been invisible. This woman was visible, at least to herself. But I was still nervous about going home. Would my family treat me differently now that some of them had apologized? Would they expect things to go back to the way they were? Would I allow that? When I disembarked from the ship, my entire family was there waiting for me. All 3 of my children and most of my grandchildren. Sandra stepped forward first and hugged me. When she pulled back, she said, "Mom, I meant what I texted. We need to talk about how we've treated you." "We do," I agreed. "But let's do it at my house, not here." Over the next few weeks, that's what we did. We had some difficult conversations. I told my children that I loved them, but that I was no longer available to be their backup plan. I said that I would help them sometimes, but not all the time, and not at the expense of my own life and happiness. I told them that I expected to be included in family activities, or if they chose not to include me, then I had to accept that we simply didn't spend as much time together. Sandra took it the hardest initially, but she also changed the most. She started actually making an effort to spend time with me, not because she needed something but because she wanted to know me as a person. Jennifer struggled less because she was already used to me having boundaries. Marcus surprised me by suggesting that we plan a family trip that we would all do together. But the most significant change was in me. After that cruise, I booked another one. And then a weekend getaway to a bed and breakfast. I joined a book club. I went back to the yoga class I had abandoned years ago. I started painting more seriously. I reconnected with Dorothy and other friends I had let lapse over the years. Did my family understand everything that happened? Did they suddenly transform into people who always put my needs first? No. But they started to understand that I was no longer available to be the foundation upon which they built their lives. And that changed the dynamic between us in a fundamental way. 6 months after that first cruise, I booked another one. This time Dorothy came with me. We went to the Mediterranean and we had the time of our lives. We were two women in our 60s and 70s, taking care of ourselves, celebrating our friendship, living the life we had always wanted to live, but had put on hold for decades. On the last night of that second cruise, I stood on the balcony of my cabin and looked out at the Mediterranean Sea. I thought about that moment in my living room, scrolling through a family group chat that excluded me, feeling the sting of being dismissed. I thought about how that moment of pain had been the catalyst for reclaiming my life. My phone buzzed with a message from Emma, my 12-year-old granddaughter. "Grandma, I'm so glad you took that cruise. It made me realize that I don't have to just be who other people expect me to be. Thank you for showing me that." I cried when I read that, because that's what I had wanted unconsciously all along. I had wanted my family to see that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. I had wanted them to understand that being available and being self-abandoning are two different things. And I had wanted my granddaughter to grow up knowing that she was worthy of her own time, attention, and love. That message from Emma told me that something had shifted in my family. Something important. My act of putting myself first wasn't selfish, it was actually generous, because it taught my children and my grandchildren that they too deserve to have lives that they built for themselves, not that they sacrificed themselves for. The story of my family and the vacations and the exclusion didn't end with a dramatic confrontation or some grand gesture of justice. It ended quietly with my family slowly learning to see me as a person, not just a role. It ended with me taking multiple vacations a year, with my children sometimes joining me but no longer being the focus of my travel plans. It ended with me becoming the main character in my own life story. When people ask me now what the cruise was really about, I tell them it wasn't about the Caribbean or the activities or even getting away from my family. It was about deciding that I was worth investing in. It was about understanding that my happiness was not a luxury, it was a necessity. It was about refusing to be invisible anymore. And if you're reading this and you're someone who has been invisible in your own family, someone who has made themselves small for people who didn't appreciate it, someone who has put off their own dreams because everyone else's needs seemed more urgent, I want you to know something: you deserve more. You deserve vacations and adventures and investments in your own happiness. You deserve to be seen and valued and included. It might take some difficult conversations. It might take some uncomfortable boundary setting. It might take booking that cruise alone, standing alone against the guilt and the criticism and the pressure to put everyone else first. But on the other side of that courage is a life where you actually get to live, not just exist as a supporting character in everyone else's narrative. That's what I learned. That's what changed for me. And I hope it changes something for you too.